Hello class, today we are going to be looking at consumer behavior. If you are writing Waec or you are writing Jamb, this is the place to be because consumer behavior is a topic that tends to come out both in Waec and Jamb. And now, when you talk about consumer behavior, you're trying to look at how a rational consumer maximizes his satisfaction from consumption of goods or services. So let's look at this concept holistically. We'll be looking at utility. Utility is the satisfaction of pleasure derived from consumption of goods or services. So in this concept, we'll be using the term utility. So when I mention the word utility, what I mean is the satisfaction derived or the pleasure derived from consumption of goods or services. For every consumption you make, there must be a particular satisfaction, because if you don't intend or you are not expecting satisfaction from anything, then you will not consume it. So it means the pleasure you have, for instance, if you are coming from school under scorching sun, you are thirsty, and what do you need? Water. That water, you are expecting something from that water, satisfaction to quench your thirst. That satisfaction you get when you take that water is what we call utility. So utility is the satisfaction of pleasure derived from consumption of goods or services. Now, please, this you must memorize. Now, then we need to look at some concepts, basic concepts of utility. Then we have total utility. Total utility, it is the satisfaction derived from all units of goods or services consumed. For instance, you are hungry, then you want to take bread. Then don't forget that when you are taking bread, maybe you have like five loaves of bread. Then you take the first loaf of bread, you take the second loaf of bread, the third loaf of bread, the fourth loaf of bread, the fifth loaf of bread. So the satisfaction you get from the first loaf of bread plus the satisfaction you get from the second loaf of bread you eat, then the satisfaction you get from the third plus the one you get from the fourth and the fifth, when you add them together, we give you total satisfaction for that consumption of food. So the total satisfaction you get when you consume a particular unit of commodity, that is what we call total utility. So take note of this. All units you take, the satisfaction when you sum it together will give you total utility. Then we now have marginal utility. But before I go to marginal utility, you see this utility, we can present it using a graph. Look at this now. I said total utility. It is the summation, and when you sum something, what is going to happen is going to be adding up. So that is why you see the graph of total utility to come up. This is the peak. You see, as you are consuming the first unit, you consume the second unit, it's going to be adding up. It's going to be moving up. It's going to be moving up. Then, at this point, this is the peak. But you will consume at a point that the total utility will not add up again. Rather, it's going to fall. So we are going to get there. Now, let's look at marginal utility. Marginal utility, it is the additional satisfaction derived from consumption of extra units. I put it here, extra units of goods or services. For instance, you take the first loaf of bread, then you take the second. When you take the second loaf of bread, there will be additional satisfaction to the first one. So that additional satisfaction you get from taking more units of that commodity is what we call marginal utility. But you need to understand one thing here. The concept of marginal utility always starts from the highest point. Please take note of that. Marginal utility always starts from the highest point. If you look at the total utility, starts from the origin, right? But marginal utility starts from the what? Highest point. Because the idea is this. If you consume the first, for instance, you are coming from this from school under the scorching sun and you need water to take, the first sip you take, just imagine it, the first sip of water you take, then you take the second sip. The first sip you take will give you the highest satisfaction. By the time you take the second sip, you will get relieved, but the satisfaction, the pleasure you get will not be up to the first one. That is when you take the first sip. So when you take the third sip, you get satisfaction. The satisfaction is adding up, but the individual satisfaction you get from the first, second, third, by the time you check the individual satisfaction of the third sip of water, it will not be as pleasure as the first one. So that is why, and that's how it goes. The more you consume, the lesser the marginal utility. That is why you see the curve of marginal utility will always start from the top and slopes downward. Marginal utility. So take note of this point. I've said something now, that marginal utility starts from the highest point, and the more you consume, the lesser it becomes. That's why it slopes down. It slopes down. Do you understand? So marginal utility, then the quantity you consume, it slopes down. Now, one thing you also need to understand, there's now a relationship between total utility and marginal utility. When marginal utility gets to the peak, when marginal utility gets to this point already, it's coming from the highest, gets to 0. When marginal utility equals 0, then total utility is at the peak. So at this point now, mu equals 0 at the peak. If you look at this peak now, any additional consumption here, it will make your total utility false. It means that any consumption after marginal utility has reached 0, the total utility will do what? Will start falling. So total utility starts falling when marginal utility equals what? 0. I take it again. Total utility starts falling when marginal utility equals 0. Please take note of that. When marginal utility becomes 0, at this point now, total utility that is increasing will start falling. So this is saturation point. You are satisfied, absolutely satisfied. It's like when you are taking water, sip, first sip, second sip, third sip, fourth sip, fifth sip, you are okay. If you want to force when you are okay, you are absolutely satisfied. That is the point. It means at that point your marginal utility is what? 0. You don't get any additional satisfaction. That is the meaning. If you don't get something, another way is 0. So you don't get any additional satisfaction at this point again. So if you take more, it can cause you pain. So when it causes you pain, the total utility means what? It falls down. Can you understand that? Okay. Having understood this, let's look at average utility. By average utility, we mean that the satisfaction consumed per unit of commodity. The first one you consume, what is your you consume the first sip of water, you get a particular satisfaction from that. You consume the second one, there will be a particular satisfaction from that. So a particular satisfaction attached to a particular unit of commodity consumed is what we call average utility. So its average utility is the utility per unit, the utility you get from each unit of the commodity consumed. Now, I would like you to look at this table. We have quantity here, we have total utility here, and we have marginal utility here. So we are consuming nothing here. It means our total utility is going to be nothing. Marginal utility will also be what? Nothing. Then, look at this again. We consume 1 here. Our total utility will be what? Our total utility is 20. Are you getting it? Then, what is going to be our marginal utility? We have 2 approaches to this. One is realistic and the other is not realistic. So, some textbook will tell you that the marginal utility here is 20. That any first satisfaction you get, any first total utility you get, is going to be your marginal utility at the first point. But some textbook will tell you that no, that your marginal utility will still be dashed here, because you can only have additional marginal when you have consumed previously. That you have not consumed anything here. That this 20 This is the first consumption, and this is the utility from it. No addition, no previous consumption. That is why you cannot have marginal utility here. So marginal will come when you have had consumption previously. So since you don't have consumption previously, there cannot be marginal utility here. So that is their own view. So take notes. Your examiner might take side. So if you have 20 utility here and you have 20 here, you can know where your examiner falls. And if you have dash here, you can know where your examiner or textbook falls. Okay. Now, the marginal utility. How do you get this marginal utility? How do you get the marginal utility? So the marginal utility has its own formula. Is mu equals total utility 2 minus total utility 1 over Q2 minus Q1. So mu, our marginal utility, what we are looking for here, marginal utility here. So what is going to be the marginal utility? So we say marginal utility equals TU2. This TU2 is always a TU on that marginal utility you are looking for. Any TU you see on that row of the marginal utility you are looking for, that's your TU2. And any preceding one, the one that comes before it, is your TU1. So if I'm looking for marginal utility here now, this will become marginal utility 2. If I'm looking for marginal utility here, this will become marginal utility 2. Do you understand? So we are looking for here now, this will be marginal utility 2. Sorry, if you are looking for marginal utility here, this will be your TU2, total utility 2. If I'm looking for marginal utility here, this will be TU2. If I'm looking for marginal utility here, this is going to be your TU2. Do you understand that? So now we are looking for this marginal utility, this is going to be our TU2. So which is what? Which is 32 minus, is it 32? Oh, 35. 35 minus total utility 1, the preceding one, which is 20. 20 over Q2. Q2 will also be the Q on that marginal utility we are looking for, which is 2 minus preceding one, Q1, which is, so we'll be having 15 over 1, we'll be having 15. So our marginal utility here is what? 15. The same thing, I'm looking for this. This is going to be 45 minus 35. That is 10. 2 minus 1, that is 10 over 1. I'm going to have 10. The same procedure. The same thing, if you do this like that, you're going to get the same thing. 53 minus 45. That's 8. 4 minus 3. That's 8 over 4 minus 3, 1. That is 8. That's marginal utility. If you look at this now, it corresponds with what I'm saying. You can see that marginal utility starts from the what? Highest. And it falls. So if you continue this now, you will get to a point that your marginal utility becomes 0. So immediately your marginal utility becomes 0. This your total utility that is rising up will start falling. Do you understand? So take note of this also. Law of diminishing sets in at a point where marginal utility becomes 0. Take note of that. Law of diminishing setting where marginal utility becomes 0. I think we are going to stop now and resume back. I will give you another video that will be a continuation of this class. But this I have said now, quickly note this. I said utility is the satisfaction derived from the consumption of goods and services. And I told you that we have total utility when you sum up all the satisfaction you get from each unit of commodity you consume at a time. And I said marginal utility, it is the additional satisfaction that you get from consuming extra units of output. And I said that average utility is the utility per unit of output. Then I told you that total utility always starts from the beginning and rises at a point when it gets to the peak. If you consume more, it starts falling. And that point is where marginal utility becomes 0. When marginal utility is 0, total utility is at the peak. So any further consumption we make the total utility to fall. And when marginal utility is 0, law of diminishing sets in. So any consumption after the point where marginal utility is 0 and total utility is at the peak, any consumption we make what? Law of diminishing, to set in. Do you understand? So law of diminishing has to do with what? Marginal utility. Do you understand that? And this is the how to work it out. So formula for average utility is just average utility equals, just get your total utility at the point divided by Q. So that's, thank and subscribe so that I can get more videos of this. We'll continue in the next video.